Good evening, Dr. Ayo Oluranti. It's a pleasure to have you here. Can you tell us a little about yourself, or just a bit of background into your growing up or where you were born, just general background information about you?
I grew up in Ibadan. I was born into a musical family. My dad introduced me to music. That's probably just 6, 7 thereabout, and there was always music all around me.
Interesting.
We had a singing fellowship, male voices that met in our house every Friday, which I looked forward to. Of course, I grew up with a lot of resources, records, tapes that covered all genres of music you can think of, So that was my very early exposure to music, which grounded me.
Interesting, very interesting. So, is it safe to say that your dad was one of your earliest influences in music? It's safe to say that, right?
I guess so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, have there been others? If there are others, maybe that you can share with us.
Those who influenced
Yes.
me, a lot, quite a lot. Right, going on from my dad, there's the person called Pastor Ogúnrántí, who was the accompanist for the fellowship I mentioned earlier on. And then there was the late Ayo Oluranti, of course, the late Olúrántí, and much later on, getting into school, the Inangas, the Owajis, they all influenced me. Christopher Ayodele, the late Christopher Ayodele. Mrs. Amaral Inanga was my teacher at the international school, Ibadan. Then much later on, perhaps when I started studying music, yes, the big influences, Rakin Yuba, of course, and then my teachers as well, Eric Moe, Rosenblum and Williams, they all influenced me.
That's really interesting to know. At least I know some of those names today. It's interesting that you grew up in these people. So, has it always been composition for you, or was at some point when you started studying music that you started writing music, or has it always been composition?
No. I started with harmonium, playing the harmonium, and my first public performance at the age of 8 was at the Juvenile Festival in my church. And then eventually I joined the choir. I started playing the organ for the choir. I started composing, or my first shot at composition was in 1987 when the Great Siege passed. Chief Obafemi, for some reasons, I was just moved to write a couple of tunes, like hymns, I'm not sure whether those tunes were actually singable. That was my very first shot at that. That was 1987. But I wrote my very first composition in 1990, which was a response to James Yankee's which I encountered in Lagos, my church CCABA, and about the same time I went to Ibadan. I encountered his composition in Camp BAC, and that was like, I said, this is what the Ghanaian has done with our music,
right? And
then I wrote my first piece. Well, Nigeria, part of Africa, vocal music is the flagship of music. So basically, a lot of my compositions are not only choral music, but music for the church. I hardly wrote secular music. But leaving Nigeria to study music in England and the US, yes. Now I became first to write instrumental music, and I've written quite a number of that. But a lot of my instrumental music are not well known to Nigeria. They're known outside the country. I mean, that's understandable. We don't do a lot of instrumental orchestral music in Nigeria.
So your choral works were much more accepted widely in Nigeria than, I mean, of course, in Nigeria.
Well, when it comes to acceptance, I don't know. But I've just been writing music and throwing my music out there. Some people perform them, some don't perform them. Just
where have your works been performed? Where do you know? How far has your compositions gone?
In Nigeria, outside
abroad, Nigeria.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, well, outside the shores of Nigeria.
Oh, I mean, virtually everywhere. Even as far as Brazil, China, Germany, England, America, Canada, Ghana. Where was it again? Yeah, basically. Okay, yeah, Iceland.
Oh, wow.
Netherlands as well. Yeah. So basically, yeah.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
So they just hear the music and the request, or people just find them online and able to have access to them online.
Take for instance the performance in the Netherlands. That was a commission, that was a project.
Okay.
There have been instances where people heard music online and requested for the scores. Like in South Africa, Brazil, that was a commission too. So, different routes and things like that. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay, so my next major question has to do with your style of composition, African art music, which a lot of us are kind of familiar with. So, what has been your greatest challenges in trying to propagate this music to Africa and to the world?
The first problem I have is the fact that I really don't know what to call African art music. And that's something I've been probing, something I've been questioning. What is African art music? Is it classical music in the language of Western art music performed by Africans? Or what exactly is it? What makes it African? This inquiry is what actually led me into my research work, PhD and things like that, studying with Akinyuga. And I got to a point where I feel that, and I mean that's still my conviction, that a true African art music genre should be based on traditional African music.
Right.
And so what problems have I had with that? When I say music based on traditional African music, what I mean is using African resources, elements, procedures, sound world, writing for African traditional instruments, So when I conceive, a lot of our instruments are used within the idiom, or that's an industry where everything's orally, transmitted, not documented, not notated. And then I conceive music for talking drums, for example, dudum, and I have nobody to play the dudum for me in the Western Orchestra or in the concert hall. Those who can play the dudum instruments right there in Africa, there's no way I can communicate my ideas through notation. So these are the problems. I've been getting access to the instruments, getting access to the performers. So that's been the great challenge. And then in the direction of choral music, I tend to explore the tonality of African languages, especially Yoruba, which I speak. And I argue that even without having musical pitches, if you're mere speaking the language, there's music.
Absolutely.
So, and when you want to try to explore that kind of thing in an experimental manner, you need fluent speakers of the language.
Are you a fluent speaker?
Oh yes, I am, and that's a challenge on its own again. So these are the problems with my own idea of what African art music is.
If you permit me to backtrack a little, I'll just go back to where I should have started this from, which is, has it always been African compositions? At what point did you make that? Was there a switch, or was it always African compositions to you?
Well, for starters, I started composing as an amateur when I didn't understand the principles, the science of composition. I started composing from a point of and using the models that I grew up with, based on functional harmony. I mean, after listening to the works of Handel and trying to write that, but deploying Yoruba language, So, would you call that African music?
Good question.
The
language is definitely African.
It's African, but the whole structure, the whole thing in which the musical idea is cast,
it's not us.
It's not. Okay. So I would say I've always been writing music in the Western idiom.
Right.
Yeah. Just trying to write in the African idiom now, whatever that means. I'm still experimenting, but most of us composers in the art music industry in Africa, we are products of Western pedagogical institutions. And
that's understandable.
Yeah, and so we write basically Western music.
Absolutely. That's totally understandable because of our colonial influence. That's a whole topic for another day, but we just have to move on to what's more important right now. What do you feel needs to be done to grow African art music audiences? Is that something you think it's important to you? And if it is, what are some ways you think we can grow our listeners or your listeners? Basically, it's something you think it's important to what you're doing.
Before you have a clientele, you need a product. You need to have something to sell. You need something that will be attractive. Something that will catch your attention. Apala music was a reaction to Tororo. Tororo that's what they call classical music in those days. And Apala was just like, we want something we can relate to.
Absolutely.
And I believe a valid art music language that will attract people to the concert hall must be one Africans can identify with. So basically, composers need to find a way to communicate, find a way to write music that will appeal to Africans. Basically, we've been writing music that appeals to the Western industry. So we need, and the popular musicians have done that so well. They write music that appeal to
the wider audience.
Yes, the Nigerian audience, the African audience. So basically, fundamentally, composers, we need to develop a product that will draw people to the concert hall.
We need more people in the concert halls. Absolutely. So the compositions need to be the ones that will. But don't you think that it's what our people know already? Like, is this mission, so to say, going to be any different from what our people know already? If you want to write a piece of classical music around Akbala music or bata, the instrument and all of that, is it going to be any different from what they know traditionally already, or is like a hybrid?
Now, when we talk about audience, I think we have different types of audiences. We have the so-called elitist group of classical musicians in Nigeria. All they understand is Beethoven, Mozart, Debussy, people like yourself. You get it? So are we trying to get into the concert hall, because they already go to concert hall to go and watch Marriage of Figaro. Do you get it? But if you say African art music, whatever that is, then you want to get Africans who don't have that Western orientation into the concert hall. Or let's put it this way, the typical Nigerian that listens to Afrobeat, who does not appreciate Handel, for example. How do you get such a person into the concert hall? So, and that gets us into the nitty-gritty of composition. How it's not just about stylistic issues, but structural issues. How do we write? Take, for example, what we understand as Africans. We don't understand the separation between performer and audience. Because in our concept, understanding of music, there's no boundary.
Yeah, we're one.
Yes, there's always audience participation. So can we create music that will engage Africans? Africans are used to, they listen to music, they get on their feet, they start dancing. That's always that participatory thing. So it means we need to rethink our trade and rethink the product, if that's the audience we're targeting. If it's the other elitist one, you already have market for their music, you have market for them, the product is already there.
Absolutely. Okay, that's quite interesting and revealing. I'm sure everyone is probably have people watching this or people listening to this already having ideas like, okay, does this mean we're going to add some pop influence to this? Are we going to have a little pop, or is it just the instrumental part of it that's going to get us dancing in the concert halls? Just saying.
Well, I think we have a problem with the fact that the world stage is already set, the market is already set, and we can't get ourselves out of the influences of established cultures, established genres, and this is what I am advocating, that we need to go beyond that. I keep referencing our traditional resources. Our traditional music, they function within certain theoretical confines. And we make that the basis of composition. Take, for example, the music of Steve Reich. Steve Reich went to Ghana. He studied Western drumming, not just appreciating, understanding things from a stylistic point of view, but understanding how they play the drums from a structural point of view, how they create the music. And he was able to extract, search, and create music based on that. That kind of activity is what is what I believe should be the basis of our music, which we appeal to Africans, But the problem is, those of us who are trained, we are not conversant with traditional genres. We don't even understand them.
Don't understand the concept of
at all. Excuse me.
Well, I believe these are mostly future prospects. These are mostly future plans and things you tend to you plan to introduce into your compositions in the future. But at the moment, do you consider what you've done so far? Would you consider yourself successful with what you've done so far, with what we already know you by?
Well, one thing I learned early about functioning in this industry is the fact that you never get to a point where you say you're right. It's very hard for me to say I have a composition that checks in all departments, and I'll say 100% fantastic. I compose and I revisit in 2 years' time. I'm like, what?
That wasn't me.
What were you thinking? You know. So I've never gotten to the point where I felt I've reached Canaan and I'm successful now, and I'm not sure I'm going to get there. You know, we just keep going. We just keep going. We just keep going. We just keep going. We just keep going.
That is wise. As a musician, as a human, consider you people superhumans. I'm sorry. That should be superhumans. What is your most prized possession?
My most prized possession. I don't think I have. I mean, because if you say possession, you're probably talking about something materialistic, something tangible. I don't have any such thing. If probably I do, maybe my laptop.
How about the piece right there behind you? That masterpiece.
I wouldn't say it's my most prized. It's not.
Something you value, something you cherish.
I mean, I value things like this. Yeah, my dad used to do a lot of canvas painting and things like that. Then I used to do a lot of painting myself. No. So, but I don't know. Maybe I'm not. I don't have enough value in myself to think of.
It shows. But it's an absolute honor and a pleasure
Thank you very much.
to have this chat with you. I think this is going to be one of many, because we'll keep keeping track of your work going forward. We'll keep looking out for all of the great things that's going to come out of African art music as regards your compositions. It's a really great pleasure to
Thank
have
you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, great viewers. Thank you for being a part of this. If you have questions, you can reach out to myself, or you can reach out to Dr. Ayọ Olúrántí directly. You can find him on social media, Facebook,
I guess so.
Instagram. He's easy to spot, so look out for him or look out for me. I am Fatima Anyekema. Have a great evening.